He's done it all. Injected himself with his own son's blood, popped more pills in a single day than a cancer patient takes in a week, and subjected his body to countless experimental laser treatments, all to chase that ultimate dream, staying young and alive forever. But as he drops his pants and the urologist approaches wielding an electricity-blasting penis shockwave wand, you have to wonder, is immortality really worth it? Would it be worth your body turning into a sloppy half-frozen soup? Or paying to be injected with the blood of some poor young man? Would it be worth getting injections and electric shocks administered to your penis every day? Well, people have tried all of that and so much more. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, here are some horrifying case studies to show you that immortality isn't all it's cracked up to be. One method for immortality that's captivated science fiction fans for decades involves preserving the brain long past its natural expiration date. It's pretty simple. When your body gives out, you simply swap in a new one. In 2018, Ninad Sestan, a neuroscientist from Yale, led his team in an experiment that was as groundbreaking as it was unsettling. Using BrainX, a system of pumps, heaters, and bags of artificial blood warmed to body temperature, they successfully kept the brains of 100 to 200 decapitated pigs alive for an astonishing 36 hours. The artificial blood circulated through the brains, staving off cell death and maintaining basic functionality. This experiment shattered long-held assumptions about brain death. It opened up the possibility that brains could someday be kept alive outside of the body for transplant into a different body. And while the brains most likely weren't conscious at the time, the researchers were shocked to find that millions of the cells in the disembodied pig brains were healthy and, quote, capable of normal activity. Steve Hyman, director of psychiatric research at the Broad Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts, admits the idea of placing disembodied brains into a brainless body and creating a functioning organism is not remotely possible yet. But research in this field seems to be inching toward that very direction. Beyond its science fiction implications, BrainX offers remarkable medical opportunities. A living brain divorced from its body opens up unique opportunities to test radical cancer treatments and study neurological conditions like Alzheimer's more in depth. But of course, there's going to be a horrifying catch here. Bioethicists, those are the people who consider the humane implications of biological research, raise serious red flags about the potential pitfalls of BrainX technology. While its medical applications are promising, the idea of using it in human trials one day opens up a Pandora's box of ethical concerns. The most disturbing question being raised is, what if the person remains conscious? What if they have a sense of self-awareness, but no way to access any of their senses? They also wouldn't be able to move or have any way to communicate with the outside world. They would be the proverbial brain in a jar, trapped in the ultimate sensory deprivation chamber with nothing but their own thoughts. What legal rights would a person like this have? Would they ever be a person at all? How do you ethically obtain a healthy body worthy of jumping into? These are questions that would all need to not only be asked but legislated. On the question of whether this research could one day snowball into an immortality-inspired existential nightmare, Sestan himself said, "The animal brain is not aware of anything. I'm very confident of that. Hypothetically, somebody takes this technology, makes it better, and restores someone's brain activity. That is restoring a human being. If that person has memory, I would be freaking out completely." That's very comforting to hear, Ninad. And so that's your daily dose of existential horror. Now put down that sandwich, we're going to go for some even more disgusting body horror. For those with deep pockets and an unrelenting desire to cheat death, the quest for immortality has taken many forms. One of the most popular and controversial options in recent years is cryonics. This approach, which involves freezing your body with the hope of future revival, is equal parts science fiction and high-stakes gamble. In simple terms, cryonics is all about kicking the can down the road, preserving bodies or just body parts in the hopes that tomorrow's technology will be advanced enough to not only bring them back to life, but also cure the ailments that led to their demise. It's a bet on the future, and for some it's worth every penny. But in reality, the results are often more like scenes from a goopy 80s horror movie than any piece of utopian sci-fi. So what exactly is cryonics? The theory behind cryopreservation is that the human body can be flash frozen, kind of like the vegetables in your freezer aisle, in order to prevent it from decaying beyond the point of repair. Imagine you're a rich guy who suddenly gets untreatable stage 4 pancreatic cancer while still in the prime of your life. Despite all of your money and resources, all you can really get is more comfort while you run out the rest of your clock. But while you may only have 6 months to live, in 10 years' time the kind of cancer you have might be entirely treatable. The solution? Keep your body nice and fresh so that the doctors of the future can defrost you, cure you, and then send you back to the world. The process here is not easy, but it's not all that complicated. The body is flash frozen at sub-freezing temperatures, then wrapped in insulating material like a baked potato before being tucked into a massive dewar, a giant metal thermos filled with liquid nitrogen. A single dewar will typically hold 4 full corpses arranged around the outside and 5 heads stored in the center. They're all placed upside down, ensuring the head stays the coldest, given your soft, gooey brain matter is particularly susceptible to decay. The dewar will then be placed in a large container with a vacuum seal, hoping to keep a consistent temperature. The handful of cryonics companies across the globe manage a large number of temperature-controlled morgues containing the corpses of their wealthy clientele, all just waiting to be revived. Of course, this process is not without its risks. Much like a steak sitting at the bottom of your freezer, human bodies are susceptible to freezer burn. Developing ice crystals can wreak havoc, destroying cells and tissues and jeopardizing the preservation process entirely. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. As you're about to find out, most of these stories don't have a happy ending that these so-called cryonauts paid for. The field began in the 1960s, and some of the earliest experiments made for the most horrifying mistakes. Robert Nelson ran a truly janky operation in Chatsworth, California, where he kept the corpses of his patients frozen on dry ice in a morgue. The child of a patient objected so strongly to Nelson's methods, he withdrew his mother from the program and drove away with her frozen corpse in the back of his pickup truck. Even devotees of cryonics argue that Nelson's plans, while important to the supposed progress of the field, were horrifically inept. Nelson at least transitioned from dry ice to a dewar filled with liquid nitrogen, but he had an awkward time stuffing in all the corpses, very likely already suffering from thaw damage into the capsule. It's like something out of a gruesome dark comedy. In 1974, Nelson froze the body of a 6-year-old boy, but the body was frozen too quickly and it cracked, destroying it without any hope of ever reviving the kid at a future date. Monstrous mistakes like this were not an isolated incident for Robert Nelson. Every single one of his clients at Chatsworth eventually experienced a critical cryopreservation failure. The horrifying discovery came when people noticed a stomach-turning stench of decay seeping from the Chatsworth dewars, revealing the grim reality of the situation. We really don't think we can put it any better than one first-hand witness of the time who said, "The stench near the crypt is disarming. It strips away all defenses, spins the stomach into 1,000 dizzying somersaults." At least they went with more dignity than the doers at a cemetery in the fine town of Butler, New Jersey. There, a failure in the vacuum seal layer of the freezer caused the bodies to reposition in the dewar and stick to each other and to the side of the capsule. But that wasn't the end of these corpses' horrifying afterlives. The dewar broke again later, and this time the corpses thawed entirely. They melted into a thick human soup at the bottom of the capsule, requiring them to be disposed of through other means. That is, once they'd been scraped off the side of the container by men wearing breathing apparatuses so they wouldn't vomit from the smell. Due to the severe damage freezing and thawing can inflict on organs and soft tissues, many cryonics organizations such as Alcor adopted a new approach in 1983, decapitating clients and preserving only their heads. This method, officially called neuropreservation, sounds like something straight out of a conspiracy theory, much like the infamous rumors about Walt Disney. How future scientists are supposed to address this lack of body is a mystery. Whether they're banking on new bodies being cloned, robot bodies being created, or living on as a severed head in a jar remains to be seen. When 3 cryonauts were decapitated for neuropreservation by Alcor, scientists gained an unprecedented opportunity to study the effects of freezing and thawing on the headless bodies. Things were relatively chill at first, but the extent of the damage was soon revealed. Skin cracked and peeled away at fractures, and all the major organ systems experienced shattering as they thawed to some degree. Even the spine had been split into 3 pieces, which is not a great situation for someone who wants to be alive. Even as late as 2006, cryonic snafus were dashing people's dreams of immortality. Dr. Raymond Martineau, a French scientist, became obsessed with the idea of cryonics as a path to immortality. He spent decades preparing for his death, believing that by 2050 the technology to bring back preserved corpses would be widely available. To this end, he bought a chateau and he started constructing an elaborate freezer system in the basement. In 1984, he would tragically get to use it when his wife passed away, and he interred her body inside the cooling unit like some kind of real-life Mr. Freeze from Batman. For decades, he kept up with the electrical bills by inviting cryonics enthusiasts to come and view his wife's body in the freezing unit for a price. When Dr. Martineau died in 2002, he joined her in the freezer, hoping that perhaps if his prediction was really right, they'd be brought back in 2050 to be together again. However, 4 years later, due to a technical issue, the freezer stopped and their bodies began to thaw. Rot set in, and after a protracted legal battle, Martineau's son had to have his parents cremated. He later expressed sadness and anger that this turn of events forced him to go against his father's last wishes. To this day, cryonics is more of an act of faith than hard science, seeing as no one who's ever submitted to the process has been able to be revived with the current technology. And whether that technology will ever exist is a big fat question mark. But cryonics companies will happily keep taking your money in the meantime. Maybe you're not the kind of person who wants to bank on being brought back after you're dead. Maybe you want to ensure you can just live forever and stay young right now. And hey, if that sounds appealing to you, and you've also got a lot of money and not a lot of moral scruples, you might be interested in becoming a vampire. And no, we don't mean anything as undignified as cashing checks and biting necks. We're talking about the burgeoning science of young blood transfusion. A San Francisco startup with an unsettling name, Ambrosia, offered a service straight out of a dystopian novel. For around $8,000, rich tech bros terrified of the looming reaper could become human guinea pigs, receiving a transfusion of 2 pints of plasma, the liquid part of the blood, from a teenager. For those feeling especially daring, $12,000 bought them 4 pints. The company's founder, Jesse Carmazin, referred to this process as, quote, plastic surgery from the inside out, just in case it wasn't creepy enough for you already. To launch his unique business, Carmazin first needed to secure 80 gallons of plasma from teenagers. While he claimed it was sourced from willing donors, the details remain murky, so make of that what you will. He claimed that some of his patients experienced miraculous effects from undergoing the treatment, from more energy to gray hair regaining its color. Carmazin even touted the procedure's potential as a cure for Alzheimer's disease down the line. So why would San Francisco's aging elite think this is a good idea, beyond them potentially taking health and wellness tips from Count Dracula? People have considered blood a potential escape route from the bounds of mortality for a long time. As his health failed, Pope Innocent VIII was said to have been fed the blood of 3 young men by his doctor in an attempt to keep him alive, which we do not think is very innocent at all. There's also, of course, the famous but likely apocryphal legend of Elizabeth Bathory, whom folklore claimed bathed in the blood of her murdered servants to stave off aging. And much more recently, in the 1920s, eccentric Russian scientist Alexander Bogdanov had regular blood transfusions, believing the practice was keeping him young and healthy. His experiment and his life came to a premature end when a transfusion from a malaria and tuberculosis patient killed him. There's some basis in the science for this ghoulish procedure, but as you'll soon find out, this might be more of a case of science bending toward greed and wishful thinking. Several studies have explored the nature of heterochronic parabiosis in mice. This involves surgically connecting the circulatory systems of an old and a young mouse for 3 months to observe the effects on both animals. Remarkably, the older mice benefited significantly, showing healthier organs, stronger muscles, and even improved brain function, which scientists dubbed the rejuvenation effect. The other side of the coin isn't so nice, as the biological age of the younger mice seemed to increase, along with the accompanying failures in health. However, once the connection was severed, the young mouse experienced age reversal and the loss of the other negative symptoms it was suffering from during the parabiotic fusion. But it isn't just the blood of mice helping mice here. One study even demonstrated that the blood of young human people tended to make mice healthier, which feels like some true mad science. From here, it's pretty easy to connect to the dots. If parabiosis and blood transfusions can put extra years on an old mouse's life, could applying the same techniques to human beings be a conceivable path to immortality? Well, that is where things get murky. The experiments into the human side of things have been plagued by bad scientific methodology, such as a lack of placebos and control groups to properly measure the effects of the treatments. Others in the medical field have had some pretty serious concerns about negative health effects of the procedure, let alone not allowing you to live forever. You really don't need a medical degree to realize that injecting blood into your body always carries a risk of potentially fatal infection if it isn't done properly. In addition to the various scientists and doctors speaking out against the dubious claims of health benefits from ambrosia, in 2019 the FDA also intervened. They released a public statement saying there is no proven clinical benefit of infusion of plasma from young donors to cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent these conditions. We strongly discourage consumers from pursuing this therapy outside of clinical trials under appropriate institutional review board and regulatory oversight. If you got the disposable income, whether you take a chance on ambrosia is really up to you. Though much like cryonics, you're likely just to end up with a lighter wallet and not any more time alive to show for it. Let's take a quick detour from modern science to explore a lightning round of ancient death deniers and their quests for immortality. Unsurprisingly, none of them are alive today, which will tell you everything you need to know about how successful they were. Ancient Chinese emperors were frequent pursuers of eternal life. Qin Shi Huang, the very first emperor of China, had his alchemists make him concoctions of mercury to help extend his life, which, as you could imagine, actually made his life a lot shorter. The first was carried forward by Emperor Ai of the Eastern Jin dynasty, whose belief in Taoist spiritual philosophy made him fascinated with the idea of immortality. Much like his predecessor, he summoned the wisest men in the kingdom to develop a pill for immortality, which is a pretty tall order for your all-powerful emperor to ask you for. He became so sick after taking the pill, he had to abdicate the throne, and he died shortly after the age of 24. The brutal but crafty Emperor Wen Xuan wasn't quite so foolhardy. He was a man full of contradictions, a vegetarian and a devoted Buddhist who was ardently against animal cruelty, but also often a drunken sadist who was happy ordering dismemberments and the execution of citizens. Like Huang and Ai, he also wanted to live forever and experimented in immortality by gathering up men who claimed to be immortal and then testing them, normally by putting them through feats that killed them. He eventually did have his court magicians create an elixir of immortality and keep it inside a jade box, but being the cautious type, he didn't want to risk drinking it and dying while he still had other options. So he waited until he was already dying and drank it when he had nothing to lose. But while we're still in the ancient East, let's head over to Japan and see a far more terrifying experiment in trying to attain immortality. Soku Shinbutsu, also known as self-mummified Buddhas. This was most famously practiced by a monk named Shojin in roughly the year 1000. He spent 1,000 days meditating and eating only tree bark in order to eliminate all body fat from his frame. Over another 1,000 days, he drank a poisoned tea which slowly made him more weak and infirm. And after all of this, he buried himself alive, the last step in gaining immortality. Except when his fellow monks came and checked on him later, he was a decomposing corpse. Probably not worth spending the last 2,000 days of your life in abject misery to get that result. These bizarre and metaphysical experiments in the quest for immortality aren't just relics of the ancient world. James Schaefer, a cult leader and an alleged former member of the Ku Klux Klan, founded a group called the Royal Fraternity of Master Metaphysicians, based in a secluded compound known as Peace Haven. But Schaefer wasn't interested in immortality for himself. He and his followers had an even stranger goal: to create an immortal baby. Their plan involved taking a baby from a poor family and raising her under strict conditions. She was fed a vegan diet and constantly surrounded by positive affirmations, while Schaefer and the other metaphysicians worked to shield her from any negative thoughts. They believed that this was the key to achieving a truly enlightened and immortal state. When she was old enough, they taught her all about the concept of death, but also that it wasn't inevitable. Maybe all of this would have worked, but we'll never know because the cult ran out of money and they had to give the kid back. Schaefer would later be convicted of grand larceny and die in prison. We've learned by now that the road to immortality is paved with unfortunate eccentrics. It's a road that thus far nobody has ever been able to take all the way to the end. There's one more experiment in immortality to look at, and it's somehow one of the strangest of all. It features a little bit of everything that we've discussed here today. Meet Brian Johnson, a living test subject in immortality science. And the one doing the testing is Brian himself. It's an experiment that he modestly calls the most significant revolution in the history of Homo sapiens. Johnson, a man in his 40s who made hundreds of millions in the tech industry, has now spent over $4 million on a system that he calls Blueprint. The system is aimed at lowering the biological age of the subject in a way that could theoretically continue their tortured existence forever. Why did we just say tortured? Well, you'll see. The blueprint method involves being the perpetual patient of a team of doctors, eternally taking various vital signs to see which biological need needs to be addressed. How extensive does this tracking get? For one thing, Brian Johnson wears a sensor on his mini Brian Johnson to monitor his nighttime erections, ensuring everything down there is still functioning like it would for a 30-something. He also takes 111 pills every day. Yeah, you heard that correctly, 111 pills, as well as wearing a special baseball cap that massages his scalp with a red light. He collects his own stool in bags daily for testing, and even undergoes shockwave therapy on his penis to maintain its size and vigor. And if that already sounds like an utterly miserable way to live, we regret to inform you that we're just getting started on the hell of Brian Johnson's blueprint quest. Because the system isn't just physical, it's also mental. Brian has spoken about needing to tame his rascal mind. That's his expression for the part of his brain that wants to do anything that could hurt his biological age. From eating chocolate to drinking beer to sitting on the couch watching TV or YouTube, doing all those things has been described by Johnson as an act of violence against yourself. He's also said that the blueprint method involves reframing what it means to be human, which in this case seems to mean never having any fun ever on pain of death, all with the hope of making death itself an optional experience. Johnson has had laser therapy on his entire body, as well as collagen fillers to keep his skin looking young. For reasons unknown, he also has absolutely no body hair save for the hair on his head. He sleeps with a laser face shield, picture something out of your favorite sci-fi show, to stop him from getting wrinkled and to supposedly encourage collagen development. Every morning he wakes up at precisely 4:53 a.m. to begin his rigid schedule, a daily grind in his relentless and seemingly futile quest for immortality. He'll step on a scale, specially made for him, which measures his weight, body mass index, hydration level, body fat, and whatever pulse wave velocity is. Once he's done taking those vitals, he uses a UV lamp to adjust his circadian rhythms to perfect standards. He then measures his inner ear temperature, takes his first round of pills, and wears his laser mask for another 5 minutes, just to keep his face looking young. You exhausted yet? Well then, he continues taking additional supplement pills, uses a vibrating device on his tear ducts, and then he hits his home gym for a few hours. He does a standard workout 7 days a week and an intensive workout 3 days a week, during which he'll wear an oxygen mask to measure his oxygen intake levels. He has a rigid diet, mainly consisting of steamed vegetables and a dense, nutty paste, and he finishes all of his daily meals by 11 a.m., around 9 hours before his strictly enforced daily bedtime of 8:30 p.m. Johnson's team of scientists constantly measure his telomeres, a component of DNA thought to be crucial in moderating cell death, something that Johnson is naturally desperate to avoid. He experimented with taking human growth hormone and also, for a time, took the kind of young blood donations we mentioned earlier from his 17-year-old son. Though even Brian noticed that that was a little weird, and he decided to atone by donating plasma to his own 70-year-old father. Thankfully, he dropped the deranged blood magic entirely when he wasn't seeing results. He was also extremely into AI, and he believes that for humans to try to ascend to the next stage, they need to fuse their bodies with AI. AI could, in Brian's vision of a perfect, immortal world, track and plan his health algorithmically. This belief is also shared by his fans, just in case the whole process didn't feel culty enough for you. All of this leads back to Johnson's Johnson, which he wants to keep eternally young, just like his skin, his bones, and the rest of his organs and muscles. Having taken all of the baseline measurements from his blood tests and his beloved nighttime boner sensor, he's been working on a method to keep the ravages of age from ever affecting him in the bedroom. Shockwave therapy is the perceived solution to Brian's perceived problems, which consists of a urologist running a wand-like device around his penis, inducing pulses of electricity that'll increase blood flow. Side effects include, brace yourself, painful erections, bruising, bleeding, curvature of the penis, blood in your urine. You'll also likely need some over-the-counter painkillers the next day to offset the dull ache that's likely to be throbbing through your member. Will any of this actually help Brian Johnson achieve his dreams of making death optional? Well, Dr. Charles Brenner, a biochemist with a specialty in aging and longevity, said of Johnson's routine, "People have the gene set that we have, which limits our lifespan. There's nothing in Brian Johnson's protocol that would change his maximal lifespan." There are people who aged remarkably well and lived for 110 or 122 years. None of those people had highly regimented practices like that of Johnson. He's put himself on better aging trajectory, but one cannot say that he has reversed or eliminated aging. And sadly for Brian, that seems to be the broad consensus on his immortality quest. Gerontologist Dr. Pincus Cohen remarked, "Death is not optional, it's written into our genes." And Dr. Eric Verdin, CEO of the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, even quipped, "If you want immortality, you should go to a church." It's not that Brian's methods appear fruitless in halting biological aging. Many medical experts have raised concerns that some of his practices might not even be safe in the short term. The doctors and scientists working with Brian on this project have avoided the limelight, with some arguing that they might be unscrupulous individuals taking advantage of Brian's vast wealth and debilitating fear of death. Sometimes the relentless pursuit of immortality results in a life barely worth living. Or worse yet, it leads to a fate far more harrowing than death itself, trapped as nothing more than a brain in a jar. What do you think? Would you want to live forever, or is immortality overrated? Let us know in the comments. Now go check out True Story Behind Human Centipede, Nazi Camp Experiments, or watch this instead.